How's it going, everyone? This is Imperial Magistrate, and today I have a new video. This is my first alternate history video, and I'm going over what if FDR did not run for a third term. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is arguably one of, if not the most important figure in 20th century history. Not just American history, but world history. In terms of American politics, his New Deal initiative helped completely change the Democratic Party and create the modern welfare state. Globally, however, his intervention into World War II helped solidify the US's presence on the world stage, as well as helped lay the groundwork for what would eventually become NATO and much of the post-World War II order. Of course, another aspect that is very well known about FDR is he is the only president to have ever served more than 2 terms, and unless the 22nd Amendment is repealed, it will stay that way. Prior to FDR, there was no constitutional limit on how many terms a president could serve. There had actually been several attempts from previous presidents to run for a third term, but none of them were successful. FDR was the only one. It was a decision that was actually quite controversial in the public and even in his own party. After all, serving 2 terms was a democratic tradition that had been upheld since George Washington himself, and FDR wanted to break that tradition. Pretty much the entirety of FDR's third term was concerned with World War II and laying the groundwork for what would become NATO and essentially the lines for the Cold War era, which would continue under his successor. Given the impact of FDR in his third term, one has to ask, what if he simply did not run for a third term, or was too ill to run for a third term? What would the world look like after that? Well, let's start with the first question. Who would FDR's successor be? The answer is quite easy. It would be his vice president, John Nance Garner. Garner, also known as Cactus Jack, had been the former Speaker of the House before being elected to be FDR's vice president after aiding him in the ballot process of choosing the Democratic nominee in 1932. Even though Garner did not view the vice presidency very highly, he did view it as a stepping stone to potentially become president later down the line. In 1940, Garner, like many other Democrats, had expected FDR to step down after 2 terms, but that did not happen, and Garner would fail to challenge FDR in the primaries and would subsequently retire from politics after losing. With FDR out of the way, however, Garner easily wins the Democratic nomination unchallenged and then goes on to win the presidency. So what would a John Nance Garner presidency look like? Well, many historians have described John Nance Garner as a conservative Democrat, but it's important to understand what conservative Democrat meant at this time. Garner was elected to Congress in 1903 and was essentially an old-school progressive, or later would be known as a Wilsonian. Initially, the Wilsonians actually worked extremely well with FDR, as FDR's New Deal policies aligned with their ideology, being anti-big business and anti-corporate monopolies. Southern progressives viewed major businesses as the primary cause of the Great Depression. As such, FDR's policy to rein them in was seen as a continuation of Wilson's policies. Garner was actually quite influential in FDR's first term in helping get through most of the New Deal policies, as Garner had a lot of connections in the House of Representatives due to his long tenure there. Where Garner and the old guard progressive Democrats would split from FDR, however, would be in his second term, with the second wave of the New Deal. FDR's second New Deal went beyond just dealing with monopolies and big business, but went on to expanding the federal government's presence in the welfare state, which many old progressives viewed as an encroachment on states' rights. The other major problem Garner and other progressive Democrats had with FDR was his tendency for deficit spending. With Garner in the White House, he would not outright repeal most of the New Deal policies, but he would cut back on them, with the justification being to balance the budget. Despite the New Deal's legacy, it has actually become more controversial over the years went by. New Deal, for the longest time, was seen as the main factor that ended the Great Depression. But many economists and historians have looked back on the Great Depression and have begun to argue that many of FDR's policies actually extended it. It is possible that with Garner enacting a more moderate form of the New Deal, that the economy could actually improve much quicker. Another major piece of legislation that would be passed under Garner's presidency would be a federal anti-lynching bill. Ironically, John Nance Garner was a segregationist Democrat. However, while as vice president, he had engineered an anti-lynching bill through Congress as a means to bolster his presence on the national stage. FDR, having feared that if this bill were to be passed, it would bolster John Nance Garner's image and could possibly lead to him either losing the Democratic nomination or Garner running as a third-party candidate and splitting the Democrat vote. As such, FDR blocked this bill from passing so that Garner would not be able to challenge him. Of course, the other major aspect of Garner's presidency would be his response to World War II. Believe it or not, with Garner in the Oval Office, it's actually possible that Pearl Harbor never happens. Despite the narrative that Pearl Harbor was an unprovoked attack by the Japanese, the reality is much more complicated. FDR had enacted various embargoes on the Japanese Empire, and as such, they were not able to buy oil from America. This is what partially led to them invading China and Indonesia as a means to appropriate their oil fields. The Japanese Prime Minister had even tried to reach out to FDR and the Americans to lift the embargo and work out a negotiation, but it never came through. And on top of all that, FDR enacted a secret order called JB 355, which essentially launched an American attack on Tokyo. Keep in mind, this was in July of 1941, before Pearl Harbor. With Garner as president, this order never occurs. It is possible that Garner could even consider opening up trade with Japan. As such, the US is never attacked by Japan, and they possibly don't even enter World War II altogether. Without US intervention, it's less likely that the Allies would be able to win. Of course, this does not mean that the Axis would automatically win, but an Allies victory does become much harder, and World War II could possibly go on for even longer. If the Allies still win World War II, Europe would be far more destroyed, and it could potentially lead to extremism rising in most of these countries. If the Axis wins, this could lead to fascism spreading across Europe. In either scenario, NATO is never formed, and the US never truly aligns itself with European countries. This could lead to the United States taking an isolationist approach and attempting to maintain a sort of New Monroe Doctrine as a means to prevent the spread of fascism and communism to the Western Hemisphere. Another consequence of Garner's presidency is that civil rights never becomes a major issue for the Democratic Party, leaving either the Republican Party or a new third party to attempt to push for more civil rights for African Americans. Garner's legacy in this timeline would probably be quite controversial. On one hand, he'll be seen as a man who in many ways continued FDR's successful New Deal policies and helped save the United States economy, leading to a new economic golden age. But on the other hand, he might be viewed as the man who allowed Europe to fall to fascism and communism. What do you guys think? How would John Nance Garner be remembered in this scenario? Would he have even become president, or do you think someone else could have possibly taken FDR's spot in his third term? I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.